Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, and I am the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome our viewers in Europe and in the United States. Today is the 9th of November, and this is a day of historic significance for two reasons. In 1989, of course, it was the fall of the wall and the opening up of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, and in many senses, a very joyous day. But the significance of the 9th of November is also very somber. 85 years ago, the National Socialist government in Germany destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, synagogues, and families. And in the space of 2 days, the 9th and 10th of November, 30,000 Jews were arrested, more than 90 were killed, and hundreds were injured in Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And in many senses, Kristallnacht foreshadowed the destruction and terror of the Holocaust. If one fast forwards to today, it was just over a month ago that Hamas brutally attacked Israel, and world leaders, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Joe Biden, have drawn parallels between that assault and the Holocaust. Biden even described it as, quote, the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. And since the end of World War II, German politics have been shaped by the term nie wieder, or never again. And yet, once again, Jews fear for their lives in Israel, of course, but also in Germany, because since the attacks on October 7th, Jews in Germany have faced violence on the streets, and authorities say that anti-Semitic crimes have increased. Homes and businesses have been marked with the Star of David as a dark reminder of the 1930s. It seems that the conflict in Gaza is really polarizing communities. And today, to help us understand what's going on in Germany following the violence in Gaza, I am pleased to welcome award-winning journalist and ACG fellow, Vladimir Balzer. Vladimir, it's great to see you. I'm
Thanks for having me.
very appreciative that you're taking the time to talk with us today, and very much look forward to our conversation.
Very excited.
So, Vladimir, you're back in Berlin after having taken a trip to the US, and you're much closer to what's happening on the streets of German cities. But there have been pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian demonstrations that have gotten violent. In one report that I read, one journalist said it's, quote, it's as if one front in the Israel-Hamas war is playing out on the streets of Berlin. And so, Vladimir, I thought we could maybe start our conversation today by having you sort of set the stage for us. What is the mood like, and what's your takeaway from the last few days and weeks observing what's going on in cities like Berlin?
What you can see in Berlin, and this is good about the city actually, that you can really see what is going on in whole Germany, which shows very strongly on the streets of Berlin itself, because it's a very diverse city with very diverse communities, with a strong part also with Arabic and Turkish immigration communities, but also with a very strong Jewish community, the biggest in Germany, which is historically speaking it's a great thing to see that, after the Holocaust, that there are up and around 70, 80,000 people of Jewish heritage in Berlin living, many of them young Israelis, by the way, who, and let me start with this, many, especially men, but also women, return to Israel now to fight for their country. So Israeli immigrants in Berlin, like in thousands, were leaving back home to support their country at home militarily. And what do we have on the streets of Berlin? We have a very strong Arabic and Turkish community, and they tend historically, of course, culturally, politically, very much towards the Palestinian side, especially the Arabic speaking community, obviously. So there are tens of thousands of people who feel a very strong connection to the Palestinian cause, hit the streets, also in thousands. And my perception of these kind of rallies are that they unfortunately don't really, let's say, tell the difference between the Hamas cause and the Palestinian cause, which is very sad to see. You don't see enough voices of these communities and of these people to distance themselves from the Hamas terror, from this horrible terror organization and from their goals. Because there were like demonstrators also in these rallies who were holding up signs saying "Free Palestine from Hamas," who were driven away, who were harassed, who were not accepted by these pro-Palestinian rallies. This is one thing. Another thing is that it's a good time. It seems to be, cynically speaking, a very good time for Islamistic movements in Germany, which there are still around. Some of them are banned, but not all. And they see a kind of historical window to make themselves heard and to mingle themselves in these pro-Palestinian groups, and also kind of trying to spread their, let's say, propaganda into the pro-Palestinian movement. And then we have on the other side pro-Israeli rallies. We had 2 or 3 altogether. We had one which took place when I was in the States, so this was at around the end of October, with around 10,000 attendees, right in the center of Berlin, close to the Brandenburg Gate. And it was very impressive to see that Israeli flags, signs of solidarity with Israel and the Israeli people and the citizens who were so heavily attacked by Hamas. But this is like politically more, it's interesting to see more, let's say, on the conservative side. So it's more supported by the CDU. It's more supported by parts of the SPD and the Green movement, but not as much as of the whole left movement, the Linkspartei and so on. They're not kind of seem to be part of this. So we have also political divide. Speaking of German parties, that especially in the left, and this was made visible in the last couple of days, there is a certain kind of left anti-Semitic, let's say, perception or attitude, which comes from the whole colonialism debate, from the anti-capitalistic debate. So it all kind of comes together, like left anti-Semitism, Islamistic anti-Semitism, imported anti-Semitism, already present anti-Semitism in Germany, which has been here for decades. I mean, we know about the 30s and the 40s. And this all is this kind of conglomerate of a very, let's say, I wouldn't say dangerous, but a very worrisome situation for Jews in Germany. So many of them don't feel safe anymore. And this is a horrible statement I have to do here at that point. We are speaking of Germany, of the country of the Holocaust, which says of itself, at least politically, it's the reason of state to protect Jews and to protect Israel. And to go on the streets with an Israeli flag, especially in parts of Berlin where the Arabic and Turkish community dominate, could be a safety issue. Mm-hmm. That's the situation. It's politically tensed. It's tensed on the streets. It divides people. It also divides families and friends. Discussion about the Middle East start to divide people. And it seems to me like, even if it's not from the content, you can't really compare it, but the whole, like the political culture of this whole situation now reminds me of the Corona times, when suddenly one dominating subject divides communities, families, and friends.
Mm-hmm. So you've put out a number of things, and it's a great starting point for us. And I'd like to sort of unpack a couple of the issues that you've touched on. But before we do that, I do have a question from one of our viewers who's curious whether you've seen a divergence and difference in opinion of Germans of Migrationshintergrund, right, with a migration background. whether they're Muslim or if they're Christian, and how they are sort of observing the situation and who they are aligning with, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a journalist. I always try to diversify, obviously. So I wouldn't. There is none such thing as one political group of people with migration backgrounds. They're all different. Um, just speaking, I just followed the Bundestag's debate this morning in the parliament, remembering the 9th of November 1938. Speaking of anti-Semitism, just to give you a reminder that the Minister of Agriculture is Cem Özdemir, who has a Turkish immigration background, and who is one of the fiercest fighters against anti-Semitism, who's one of the biggest supporters of Israel, and who tries to build bridges between, let's say, the white German majority and the migration or migrational communities. Let's put it this way. So there are definitely, especially in the Arabic-speaking communities, there is this kind of attitude which has been always there. It's actually not important if they are born in Germany or not. Many of them say, Holocaust, this is your history. That's not ours. We came here much later than that. We came here in the 60s and the 70s or in the 80s, maybe even in the 90s. But this is not our history. Even though they go through German schools, they go through the German education system, they still, and this is really sad to see, don't seem to accept that part of history, of German history, as their own. That's why remembering the Holocaust, being aware of the German responsibility, historical responsibility, is not part of their civil DNA. And this is one of the reasons how it actually is possible that anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, which is all kind of mixed together somehow, seem to be really have an effect on them, and they don't seem to be immune. They don't seem to be immune. Yeah.
So as you were speaking before, you talked a little bit about the common ground between some of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations and the far left in Germany, and that there are anti-Semitic sentiments that bring the two together. But particularly now with this discussion about a new political party around Sarah Wagenknecht, that sort of is appealing to the far left fringes, but also the far right fringes. Can you talk a little bit more about where there's this common ground between the pro-Palestinian groups and the far left?
Yeah, well, it starts off actually, I think, well, it seems to be this kind of perception of Israel as a, let's say, a white capitalistic colonial kind of state. This is their perception, which is totally wrong in my mind, but this is how they see it. Because it's backed by the US, it's backed by the West, let's call it this way. And it has, a very modern kind of globalized capitalism, which is part of the Western global capitalist world. This is one part. The other part is the Palestinian people who don't have a state, who never had a state. But this has many reasons, obviously. We're not talking about the Middle East here in this web talk, but they see the Palestinian, which has been always like that for the last decades, even though I grew up in East Germany. And the Palestinian people were, let's say, portrayed as a symbol of anti-capitalistic, anti-American kind of fight of resistance and of freeing this communities, these people from capitalistic, imperialistic, whatever they might have called it, approach. And this is still around. This kind of attitude. I would even say many of these, let's say, rather radical lefts don't are not as interested in the Palestinian cause as they pretend to be. It's just a symbol. It's a metaphor. It's something they can unite behind.
Yeah. So let's go from the far left to the far right. One of our viewers is curious to know who the far right is sympathetic to, who it's sort of showing an allegiance for. And that's, you talked a little bit about the CDU, CSU a little bit earlier, but what about some of the further right people? I mean, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is one example, but there are some other, populist groups.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually, because the right, which is really interesting to see in the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think we all agree October 7th changed the world. It changed not only the Middle East, it changed Europe, it changed any country in the world. It changed the Jewish history, it changed the Israeli history. So what I can see in the last 4 weeks, following the days and weeks after October 7th, that the rather right-wing movements were pretty quiet, which is interesting because I mean they are actually, I mean, they have this very strange kind of attitude, which they but still they didn't really give this a voice. It's interesting to see. They are very anti-Islam, which they are, but they didn't use, like, for propaganda reasons, this very situation, because maybe they would have been reminded of anti-Semitic movements inside their own groups. So they have both in them. That's why they kind of are still on the sidelines in this kind of discussion, and are not able to really profit from it. Don't join the discussion in any to any extent, and they have both in it: anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim, and also anti-Arabic. They have any kind of anti, which is beyond white Christian majority. So, but that's not part of the discussion. There are no rallies on the streets. So they are pretty quiet in the moment, which is strange to see. Yeah.
Yeah. Vladimir, earlier you talked about the fact that many Jews do not feel safe anymore in Germany, and we talked both about the spike in anti-Semitic acts. What has been the response to those acts, right? The painting of the Star of David, or even some of the more violent altercations that have existed. I know that there have been some attempts to sort of rein in some protests and demonstrations, and not permit some of them. But one also has to find a balance between free speech, but not facilitating hate speech.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly, you totally nailed it. I mean, this is the point. We are still a democratic, open society where free speech is held up really dearly. So that's really really important. But as I already said in the beginning, radical Islamistic anti-Semitic movements try to profit from this situation, from these tensions, and also set up rallies. Which, for example, we had that recently in Essen. It's a couple of days ago. I think it's been on Saturday, as far as I remember. You had, just to give you an example, we had 3,000 people hitting the streets for a rally, which, let's say, wanted to establish a caliphate in Germany. And it was all written in Arabic on these flags, on these banners. Many policemen were not able to read that. And they obviously don't have enough policemen with migration background, which is also a problem, actually, in these days, and with understanding of the Arabic language. You had a gender-separated demonstration. You had men and you had women totally separated. And you had really a very kind of it was a horrible sight to see that there wasn't anything about Palestine. It was about a caliphate. It was about a Islamistic kind of regime, and that's a demonstration which has nothing to do with the cause of the Palestinian people. And but police is overwhelmed. Police is not really ready for these kind of, how can I say, these radical, especially Islamistic radical groups, which
Mhm.
always find a way to express themselves. Today is the 9th of November. So we have, coming back to Berlin, this is new for Germany in at least, I don't know, in the last 20 or 30 years. We have 50 events remembering 9th of November 1938, these pogroms against Jews in Nazi Germany, Reichspogromnacht, as it's called in German. You have 50 events, and they are safeguarded by 1,400 policemen. And this is 3 times as many as there were in the years before. So imagine 1,400 policemen taking care of the safety of these 50 events, of a thing which should be the absolute most regular, normal thing to do in Germany, remembering these pogrom nights. So they are afraid of, obviously, anti-Semitic attacks from different kinds of groups. In the light of the Middle East conflict. And so Jewish life, on the one hand side, and also the memory of the Holocaust is not as, how can I say, normal, not as given anymore as it was the years before. And the Jewish community is really frightened about that.
Mhm.
So that's a situation. And we had, on the other hand side, I don't know if maybe many watchers here have heard of this. One of the reactions of the Hamas war against Israel was also to ban Hamas in Germany. And this is not the only thing. There has been also another kind of society which was called Samidun, which
Yeah.
is also a radical, let's say, anti-Israel, I would even say anti-Semitic kind of society, which actually started in London but has also a German branch. And this was banned now by the Interior Minister.
Yeah.
And she was saying this morning in the Bundestag debate a very interesting sentence, which was really moving, to say "Nie wieder ist jetzt," which means
Right.
never again is now. So this whole, what we call in Germany Sonntagsreden,
Yeah.
these speeches which you hold on a Sunday, which sounds
Yeah.
nice, but which don't have any real political, let's say, facts behind it. So this is getting stronger, this kind of also reaction of the state. But it's Germany. It takes a while.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy is very strong. It took 3 weeks to ban Hamas after October
Yeah.
7th. There
Well,
has been.
I mean, this is actually a really good segue to something else that you and I wanted to talk about, which is, I think it's fair to say that really standing with Israel and welcoming Jewish life are important elements of Germany's collective atonement for the Holocaust, and that it's that sort of sense of responsibility that in many senses drove Germany to keep its doors open to millions of refugees from the Middle East and other majority Muslim countries since 2015, right? Over the last nearly decade or so. Um, and now there are huge questions about Germany's migration policy and about sort of the makeup of the citizenry in Germany. There was a Ministerpräsidenten conference on Monday where the heads of each of the German Länder met, and then a Bund-Länder conference where the minister presidents and the federal government came together. And at the top of the agenda was, of course, migration policy. And we've seen for weeks that there have been lots of questions around migration policy at the moment. Can you talk a little bit about whether the events of the last 3 or 4 weeks in Germany and sort of this real sort of polarization and the fundamental questions that are being posed as one sees this kind of fighting, how that's impacting the migration policy?
It does impact it indeed. I mean, because that's what we also had this discussion when the Syrian refugees came over to Germany, and also the Afghan refugees. Speaking of a different kind of political culture, a different kind of idea of society, of living together with other religions, other political cultural groups, gender equality, many other topics, which were discussed. And now this definitely, how can I say, cynically speaking, the whole situation helped, obviously. The whole discussion, or let's say, moved it forward to restrict asylum seeker numbers in Germany, which are historically high, which is really hundreds of thousands of people are coming to Germany. And you all heard of the European battle of finding a common kind of ground, a common kind of asylum policy, which seems to be a really heavy thing to do, which has been going on for years now. And Germany tries to, on the one hand side, to stick with this, let's say, human right of asylum in Germany itself, but on the other hand side, to deal with the numbers, which are really overwhelming, especially for the smaller kind of villages and cities and so on, which have to deal with it. It's we have this different levels, federal level and the state level, and cities and villages who have to deal with it. It's more a question, as it's very often like that in Germany. It's about money, who pays for it. So the Bund, so the federal government now agreed to pay 7,500 euros per asylum case, and to help the Länder, the states with that money, also change, let's say, what asylum seekers are provided with. So it's less money than rather kind of groceries and everything they need for their everyday life. And also, and this is the main thing, to make these kind of this asylum process quicker and more effective. So it could be done already after 3 months, for example, much faster than it had been before. This is the way they want to deal with that situation. And the whole conflict, the whole tensions we are talking about here in this video call definitely, let's say, made this whole discussion move forward. Yeah. But it's still, how can I say? Fortunately, the AfD, which is always the party, especially in the East, which is like a right-wing sting in this whole discussion, didn't profit and wasn't really, let's say, the pushing force. So that's why I would say it's not overshadowed. The whole asylum debate is still not overshadowed by this. This may change. Yeah.
A couple of viewers have questions about German Jewry, and I'm not sure if these are questions that you have the answers to, but I thought I would pose them anyway. You said a little bit earlier that many of the German Jews are now going to Israel to support Israel and even to fight. But one of our viewers is curious if most of them are returning to Israel, or if some of them are looking for other countries like the United States, where they might feel safer since the beginning of the war.
Not yet. At least not with considerable numbers. The only well, I don't have even numbers. They're not counted here. But the only reliable kind of information about Jews or Israelis leaving Germany for a while. I'm speaking for a while. It's not
Yeah.
for good. Hopefully, I want them to be back soon.
Yeah.
But leaving Germany for a while to join the Israeli army, I don't have numbers. I would say
Yeah.
it's maybe 4,000, maybe 5,000 people. It's not as many, but it's a considerable number. Yeah, definitely. But it's not like leaving Germany because being afraid of anti-Semitism. Not yet, not yet. That has
Yeah.
been affected in France, has been affected in other countries, but not in Germany. I think this would be, I mean, I can't even imagine
Yeah.
if it would be the case. I don't know what that would mean for Germany. Yeah.
And another viewer is curious if you know how many German citizens have dual citizenship with Israel.
Oh, a lot of, especially all these young Israeli people. I don't know about the viewers. Maybe some of them have been to Berlin already to see this modern Jewish life, which also means it's a modern Israeli life. Actually, Berlin is the second largest Israeli city. If you compare it, to other places, taking the numbers into consideration, we have like, I don't know, it maybe 20, 25,000, maybe even more Israeli citizens here, especially young people who see a similarity between Berlin and Tel Aviv, and some of them consider Berlin as the better Tel Aviv. Not of the weather, actually. It's November in Berlin. It's not very nice, but generally speaking, but and they have, many of them took on German citizenship, mainly not because of they wanted to be German citizen, but they wanted to be part of the European Union and travel as easy as all the other Europeans at the European Union. Yeah.
So you've interspersed a couple of responses by some of the political leaders, and I'd be curious to talk a little bit more about the political response and what the expectations are. One person that you've not mentioned is Robert Habeck, the Vice Chancellor and Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy. And he actually had, I guess, an 8-minute social media speech that really got a lot of attention because of its moral clarity, for lack of a better expression. Can you maybe talk a little bit about his response and sort of the expectations that the public might have of other figures like the Chancellor Olaf Scholz or even the Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock or others in leadership?
That's very good and very important question, because I was just speaking of myself. I reported on this video the other day in our program, and I was really impressed by it because it had this kind of. I really recommend anybody, not only the German speaking public, but also there has been an English subtitle version also published.
Yeah, I think it was translated into several languages, right? The subtitles.
Even Arabic.
Yeah.
So we have a version where I think you have even English and Arabic subtitled or something like that. So
Yeah.
So he's it's not another voice. It's just subtitled. Habeck has many talents, but not speaking Arabic. And this was a very interesting speech, which I, as I said, would really recommend to watch on Instagram. And he was able to find the right words and to really, I don't know, to use the right tone. After a while, to really make clear what actually happened on October 7th. This was just really important for him to express, because obviously the Chancellor wasn't able to do that in the right tone, in the right kind of way of speaking out. And Annalena Baerbock, as Secretary of State, obviously, of course, is very much part of the international diplomacy. She has to speak differently. She can't speak up as easy as he does. And I think he was also under the impression of this UN resolution, of this very debatable UN resolution the other day, when Hamas wasn't really mentioned. when it was speaking about the terror and the violence in the region. And Germany, instead of rejecting that, because Hamas was not mentioned and because nothing was mentioned how it actually started, who did the first step. He was under the impression of that, obviously. That's what I hear also out of his ministry. And he said, okay, I really need to speak up now. And I think it was a very good speech, because he not only mentioned what is really important for Germany, this, I don't know how you say it, a reason of state, is that the right expression? The reason of state? Yeah. Reason of state to protect Israel, to protect Jewish life in Israel after the Holocaust, which is, I say, the most reasonable and the most logic thing if you look on German history. And that's what he mentioned very emotionally. And on the other hand side, he also addressed a part of his constituency. I mean, the left-wing voters who vote for him, there are many of them, who, as we already talked about, have, like, I don't know, maybe confuse their pro-Palestinian approach with anti-Israeli approach. And he wanted to make clear that this is just not acceptable. You can be pro-Palestinian, but you can't be anti-Israel, and you can't, not speaking of anti-Semitic. And that's why he addressed the left movement very strongly. He criticized the International Fridays for Future movement, who put up this really very questionable post on Instagram, speaking of imperialistic kind of powers who are behind international media, supporting Israel instead of understanding the Palestinians, and so on. He also said to the Muslim community, Muslim community, but he said more the societies and the groups who represent the Muslim community, that they had to stand up and distance themselves from the Islamistic movements, and to say, this is not in our name. This was a strong speech, which Robert Habeck is, I mean, you remember, he was playing with the idea of getting chancellor. He wasn't the official candidate. He may be the next. This was regarded as much stronger as Annalena Baerbock's kind of appearances in the last couple of weeks. So it was also, he wasn't speaking as a minister of economic affairs, he was speaking as the vice chancellor.
Right.
And this is obvious. Yeah.
And obviously, I mean, a lot can happen in the next 2 years between sort of September, October of this year and the next expected federal elections. So he's obviously a person to watch, but I agree with you. It's a strong recommendation that people watch that speech, which has been posted to the chat. Along this line of balancing freedom of speech and marginalizing hate speech, one of our viewers has more of a comment than a question, but this person writes in, have we failed to define freedom fully by failing to include personal responsibility to limit violent conduct and vocabulary?
Okay. It's almost a philosophical question. Difficult to say. I mean, what is now going on in Germany especially is a debate about banning anti-Semitic, let's say anti-Semitic kind of expressions. And I mean, what is absolutely banned in Germany is denying the Holocaust. If you deny the Holocaust, then you will be prosecuted, which is a good thing. But it took Germany decades to do that. Yeah, it has been introduced only a couple of years ago. So, and now there's a discussion if there is, for example, coming back to the whole asylum discussion and the whole refugee discussion, if there anybody applies for asylum, even if this person has the right to receive asylum, if you can prove that he has an anti-Semitic kind of approach and he expressed himself like that, then there is this idea from the CDU-CSU to deny any kind of support or protection. Because anti-Semitism is just not tolerable at all for anybody who wants to come to Germany, who wants to have protection here, and who wants to live in this society. So this discussion is getting stronger, and this is definitely also targeting big groups of Muslim and Arabic communities. With no German passport, obviously. But I mean, if you have a German passport, you stay where you are. But if you want to be a German citizen or seek protection or any kind of or a visa, this could be if there would be a majority, which I don't see in the moment. But if one day there would be a majority for that, this could be a reason to ban people from coming here.
Vladimir, obviously you're a journalist, and you cover a lot of stories, but I'd sort of love to get your take on how the German media has been reporting on a couple of different things, right? On October 7th itself, on the ongoing open conflicts that we're seeing unfold, but also on the reaction in Germany, right? Many of the issues that we've been talking about today. How have you sort of been watching the coverage, and what have been some things that you've noticed?
Interesting thing is, I think, I don't know about the States, but I would even say it's a kind of international effect on media, that it took most of the media, let's say the real media, like the editorial media, I would put it this way, not the social media, but the editorial media where journalists are behind. It took them 2 or 3 days after October 7th to really understand what is happening in Israel, what was happening with the Hamas attack, because we weren't provided with pictures. We weren't very much provided with videos. They all came up in the last couple of, let's say, 10 days. So the most of all these horrific scenes weren't public, weren't accessible in the first days. If this would have been the case, maybe the coverage would have been different. I see there is a lack of coverage, especially in Germany, to make people understand what actually really happened on October 7th to the Israeli society. Yeah. This was one of the most shocking, most traumatizing events in Israeli history in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years. Many were reminded of the Holocaust itself. There were scenes which were also shown to some German journalists in the last couple of days, but as I said, it took a while before it really, came out, which definitely also the most, let's say, hard-boiled people reminded were getting out of this. There was one press conference in the Israeli embassy. I wasn't there. A colleague of mine was there, and he's really a hard-boiled journalist. He's been around for 40 years, and he almost broke down. And this is something. If this would have been more public, then maybe the understanding of October 7th would have been different. Then it's the situation in Gaza unfolded, and we can see that this actually took over. How can I say, the fight of pictures, the fight of images, and now this is dominating, definitely. Which of course are horrible situations. I mean, we're not, and I don't want to make this small or something, but this made October 7th at itself, put it in the background a little bit. Yeah. And so the discussion is now much more about, let's say, the tactics and the disputable tactics, or maybe the military kind of approach of Israel in the Gaza Strip. And October 7th itself is, I wouldn't say forgotten, but it's definitely in the background and in the shadows now. And that's, how can I say, that's a bad thing. because
Yeah.
people definitely, the public should always, you know, even with these pictures from Gaza, still remember what happened to Israel in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that one of the other challenges that comes into this, and one of our viewers also just sent a note about this, is how one gets accurate and legitimate information from Gaza. I mean, one of the things that's been reported quite widely in the US press as well has been how difficult it has been to get journalists in there. I mean, obviously, at this point, with our phones and devices, there are journalists everywhere, but how accurate and legitimate is the information that one's getting,
So difficult.
and what information can be trusted?
It's so difficult, extremely difficult. And we don't have a reporter in Gaza, obviously, on the ground. As I heard, there were some American TV reporters from NBC, as far as I can see, or two or three other outlets who made their way into Gaza and who have their stringers or who have their, like, say, colleagues, like Gaza reporters, Gaza people. They bring out some stuff, but we also have a very strong Hamas propaganda machine, which is very effective, obviously, especially on social media. We have obviously social media as one of the main sources of information for the world. And this is definitely dominated by the Hamas narrative. We as journalists have a hard time really covering this Middle East conflict. We also have, just mentioning one of my colleagues, we also have other situations, like he has been to the West Bank to cover the increasing violence of settlers against Palestinians. Which is also a kind of forgotten conflict in the moment, obviously, because of the strength of the other images. And they were threatened by Israeli military, and it was all solved after 2 or 3 hours. But there was Israeli military pointing like guns at German journalists, which was a middle-range scandal. And which is not good, which is unacceptable, obviously. Yeah? So it is a hard time now. I hear this from our correspondents. Of course, they can move freely in Israel itself, but reporting from Gaza, reporting also from the West Bank is an issue now. Yeah.
So we have one viewer who's tuned in from Brussels, I believe, who has a comment and then a question. And he writes, just to clarify, not only Holocaust denial and distortion is banned in Germany, as well as in all EU countries, but also incitement to hatred and violence against Jews or other minorities. So the limits to freedom of speech are much narrower. However, he points out the enforcement is still lacking behind. And he goes on to ask a question. He writes, on the role of the media and the portrayal of Israel, can you see any anti-Israeli bias in many Western media over the last decades?
Wow. I'm sure there have been scientific researches on that. I can't really answer it in one sentence, or I can't really answer it like fully. I would never dare that, but I don't have numbers. I just have an impression. It's a very personal impression. I don't have proof for that, as I didn't do any research on it. But generally speaking, how can I say? As I say, it's this very, 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 very personal impression of mine.
Yeah.
Now, as we can also see, the unfolding Middle East conflict and this war in the Middle East, that how can I say? The situation of the Palestinian people is much stronger in the minds of many journalists than the situation of the Israeli state and the danger for the Israeli state, surrounded actually by enemies. Not all real enemies, as Jordan is not an official enemy, obviously, but Lebanon is, the Hezbollah is, Iran is not far away. And I'd say, generally speaking, as I say, I'm really underlining here, that's my very, very, very personal approach. um, the danger which comes from Iran, and this has definitely been being underestimated by many German journalists. That's what is really just a very sad thing to see. They only focus very much on this conflict, Palestinians and Israelis, and don't see the danger which comes from other places, from the Hezbollah, for example, from Lebanon, from Iran, from Syria. They don't have enough an understanding of the whole region. Many of them. Yeah. Definitely not all, but many. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people are also thinking about the future, right? And part of it depends on how some of those countries respond to the current crisis. But it's also very difficult to think about what the future holds while this fighting is going on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, one of the topics that I wanted to come back to as we sort of start to wrap up, you talked a little bit about how November 9th of 1938 is being recognized with 50 different events in the city and almost 1,500 police officers to protect those events. It seems to me that there's sort of a split in how one memorializes events and activities, and that's especially true on the 9th of November, but especially this year, given the war and the fighting that's going on in Israel right now. How are both events being recognized? Can you talk a little bit about the 1938 Kristallnacht memorials, but then also the 1989 Fall of the Wall commemorations that are happening at the same time?
That's the thing. That's just really, I mean, that's a very ambivalent day, 9th of November, obviously, for these two reasons. So one thing is, I mean, one of the darkest hours in German history, the 9th of November 1938, when thousands of Jews were hunted and synagogues were burned down and people were killed and harassed and their businesses were destroyed. Horrible pictures, horrible situation, and definitely a kind of pretext for what came afterwards. One of the biggest atrocities in human history. And then you have 9th of November 1989, the fall of the wall, which is one of the best, one of the lightest, one of the brightest days in German history when the wall came down. Mm-hmm. Which is already history, which is actually interesting to see. I mean, I was almost a child when this happened, but I can really feel it's been really, really long time ago. If you walk through Berlin, you wouldn't really see that this is a separated city. There are some parts where you can definitely still feel the separation, but 9th of November was even in the discussion about a kind of national holiday. It was discussed about. It was even discussed about as the date of the reunification in 1990. Then they took the 3rd of October because this was a date which didn't have any kind of historical,
right?
Let's say, weight. That's why it's a very ambivalent, very, very difficult day. Because you have these both events, both really important historical events, but they show at the same time when you want to, I mean, if you want to understand Germany, if you want to understand German society of today, if you want to understand German history, you have to keep in mind the 9th of November of both years, of 1989 and of 1938, because both speak about German history and both make you understand what actually happened to this country in the last century. And where we still, as a German society, also are built on. You know, we are built on both, on the memory of the Holocaust, but also the just this joy of coming together again after decades of separation. But we can never celebrate the 9th of November of '89. Yeah. It's just not possible. There wouldn't be any party. I mean, I was asked also in the States. I mean, That's, I mean, this was when the 30th anniversary of the fall of the wall was in 2019. I was asked, why don't you celebrate that? I mean, it's a great party, isn't it? I mean, should we help you with something? Or I said, no, it's just impossible because this person didn't know about the 9th of November 38. And I explained it to him, and
Mhm.
then he understood immediately. There will never be a big reunification party on the
Mhm.
9th of November. Just
I mean,
impossible.
certainly not on that date. I mean, I think, for a lot of people, November 9th was the beginning of a process. Well, not the beginning, but it was an important um, point in a process of the real transformation that took place in 1989 and 1990. But obviously a hard day to celebrate as history continues, or as time continues, and when one puts it in the context of history of other events that took place on that date. Um, as we sort of wrap up, I have one more viewer question who's curious to know about Germany's public sentiment toward Benjamin Netanyahu. He writes that it's clear that Germany has steadfast support for Israel, but what is the view of Netanyahu in Germany right now?
Well, there's the view of the Ampel coalition, of the Social Democrat, Liberal Democrat, and Green coalition, who had always been, let's say, they never had a very good relation to him, nor a very good political relationship to him. They uh, got along very much better with the government before. Uh, and we see, I mean, in a moment, obviously, because Israel is or has been under attack and it's in a war with Hamas. I mean, we see one of the most probably the most right wing government ever in the history of Israel, especially concerning the approach towards the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and the solution of the Middle East conflict. So that's let's say a very, how can I say, it's not a bad relationship between these two governments, but it's not good at all. There's no trust, especially with the person of Netanyahu, and which is obvious now. He's probably the most weak prime minister Israel has ever had in the last couple of years, and I'm almost sure after the war he will have to step down, or there will be even a new election. And I just know of many German Jews and of also Israelis living in Germany that their anger about Netanyahu was such, I mean, it was just incredibly strong because they were aware of how Netanyahu actually weakened the safety of his own country by the political steps he undertook. We all know about it, the this reform of the courts, and how he tried to reduce the democratic kind of system in Israel and so on, and at the same time weakened his country, weakened the safety of his country, didn't listen to the whole intelligence community, didn't listen to military representatives who said, there is a danger. What are you doing now? There are hundreds of thousands of people on the streets. There are even military personnel who refuses to do their job because of that situation. I mean, you have to be aware how you actually undermine our safety, and he just didn't very much take care of that, and didn't really take it seriously. I heard very, very angry voices about him, that
Mhm.
he was called. I mean, I had a talk with friends. They called him a traitor.
Mhm.
Uh, I think, I'm sure he hasn't very much support,
Yeah,
even amongst his own voters.
yeah. Well, Vladimir, herzlichen Dank. Many thanks for taking the time today to speak with us and share your thoughts, share your insights with us. We very much appreciate it, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue with you at another occasion, and hopefully there will be some more positive things then for us to
Hopefully.
talk about the next time.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure. Also, thanks for the great questions which were put.